I'm confused about one thing though. His name was Charles, not Citizen.
Okay, all right.
This is episode 1 of I Finally Saw, where today I finally saw Citizen Kane. Well, hello and welcome to what is the first in hopefully a long series of retroactive reviews. This is I Finally Saw, a podcast where me and my friends take it upon ourselves to finally take a look at some well-regarded, beloved, classic, and maybe even infamous movies. And so, this being our first episode, it seemed like there was no better way to kick the whole thing off than with a movie like Citizen Kane. But before we get into that, I want to sort of briefly introduce who we have on the panel today and talk a little bit about where this show was born out of and how we all sort of know each other. So, first up, we have Andromeda.
Hi, everybody.
So I guess just as a really quick kind of introduction to our audience, I want to ask you a question. And that question is, what is one movie right now that you think you can rewatch over and over and over again?
I feel like the only movie I've really been able to do that for and can continue to do that for is Coraline. Like, I just have seen that movie so many times throughout my life, and I could just keep rewatching it because I think I get something new every time I watch it.
Nice. So now I'm going to pass it over to another friend of mine. This is Marquise. So Marquise, I'd like to extend to you the same question because I'll be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure what the answer for this one might be, despite how we know each other. So Marquise, let me ask you, so that the audience can make premeditative judgment about your character. What is one movie that you think you can endlessly revisit?
I have two, right?
Well, that's not the question.
And it'll probably like flip flop. No. It'll probably flip flop between these two within my lifetime. But it's gonna be down to these two.
Well, it wouldn't flip flop after your lifetime, Marquise.
Maybe it does. Maybe I'm just like kicking it somewhere, and I'm just like, hey.
You come back as a ghost to tell me you changed your mind about the... Okay, what are the two movies?
Maybe. I would say either Pulp Fiction by Quentin Tarantino or The Suicide Squad by James Gunn.
Okay.
Probably those two.
And last but certainly not least, we have my good friend Dayton. So Dayton, once again, I extend this question to you. What is one movie that you think you can sort of endlessly revisit?
I think for me it's The Muppets from 2011.
Ooh.
I have rewatched that movie. I rewatched that movie a lot in high school specifically. Like there was one week I watched it like every day to tell everyone I would not get bored of it, and I didn't get bored of it.
That's great. I mean, that's commitment. That's putting your claim to the test.
Exactly.
All right, so once again, right before we get into the review here, I did want to talk a little bit, just briefly, about where this show was sort of born out of, because so we all got to know each other in university. We went to film school together, and as a result, like, it's just been a constant source of recreation for us to just watch movies together. That is just how we hang out. We just watch movies together. We went to the theater all the time. We went over to each other's apartments and watch movies. We watch good movies, bad movies, new movies, old movies, all kinds of movies, and I think that was a really wonderful time and experience, and so I'd like to sort of keep that going. And an experience I've always sort of had ever since I really became involved in learning about movies and how movies are made is people getting offended with me that I hadn't seen certain movies. People taking it personally, being surprised, and it just like, how have you not seen that? And I was like, do you want a tutorial or something? I just didn't. And so I figured, well, maybe it's time for me to sort of do my due diligence and say that if I do want to, claim myself to be a big appreciator of the art form, then maybe I ought to take some time to actually watch these movies. And I think I have a bit of a reputation amongst my friend group as someone who is just knowledgeable about random things, and I know it's been a source of frustration for some when I speak as if I am educated on certain movies, and then people are like, "Oh, what was your favorite scene?" And I'm like, "Oh, I haven't seen it."
I know. I can personally attest to this. There are so many times where me and Austin are having like a deep intellectual conversation about like the making of a movie, or, like something that went on behind the scenes, and then like I'll reference a certain part of the movie or ask him about it, and he'll look me dead in my face. I was like, "Oh, I haven't seen it." It baffles me every time, and no matter how many times I have the same exact conversation, it keeps happening, and I'm still baffled every time.
It's not my fault that I've seen too much Watch Mojo, okay, guys? So, but anyways,
You watch too much Watch Mojo.
Our audience won't understand that reference.
I know. You can cut that
Already
out.
alienating our audience, Marquise?
Guys,
The
how am
7 people that have
I
been
need...
listening to this have already tuned out because of that.
We're not even 10 minutes into this, and then you're already...
You can edit it
away
out.
from our audience.
What are we having about?
It's been 5 minutes and Marquise has already... It's been 5
Listen,
minutes
we
into
have
the...
to...
It's not just been 5 minutes into the episode. It's been like 5 minutes into the history of the show, and Marquise is already screaming at us.
I'm not even screaming.
Okay.
No, it's just like we need to make like a Patreon video that's just like, here are the bits explain.
Here's a graph. Here's a table chart for you. We haven't started. What bits?
We haven't even started this episode, and you're talking about Patreon already.
Anyways, that's a little bit of a preamble out of the way. So let's get into the crux of this review. So just as a little bit of an introduction, the following is a little excerpt from Google and Wikipedia because I'm too lazy to write something myself. Citizen Kane is a 1941 American drama directed, produced by, and starring Orson Welles, and co-written by Welles and Herman J. Mankiewicz. It was Welles' first feature film. The quasi-biographical film examines the life and legacy of Charles Foster Kane, portrayed by Welles, a composite character based on American media barons William Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer, Chicago tycoon Samuel Harold McCormick, as well as aspects of the screenwriters' own lives. The film follows a reporter who is assigned to decipher newspaper magnate Charles Foster Kane's dying words. His investigation gradually reveals the fascinating portrait of a complex man who rose from obscurity to staggering heights. Though Kane's friends and colleagues, Jedediah Leland, portrayed by Joseph Cotton, and his mistress, Susan Alexander, portrayed by Dorothy Comingore, shed fragments of light on Kane's life, the reporter fears he may never penetrate the mystery of the man's elusive final word, Rosebud.
How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? This is Orson Welles. I'm speaking for the Mercury Theater, and what follows is supposed to advertise our first motion picture. Citizen Kane is the title, and we hope it can correctly be called a coming attraction.
So, I think to kind of kick off this discussion, before we get into what we thought about the movie or things that sort of stuck out to us, I'd like to sort of go around the virtual circle here and ask everybody, how familiar were you with this movie prior to, I want to say, 2 distinct periods? Because we did have, this is one of the few movies, if the only movie I can immediately think of, where we had a dedicated lecture in film school about just this movie. And then, obviously, in preparation for this discussion. So there's obviously those 2 instances when we have been kind of very heavily exposed to this movie. So I'd like to ask, prior to that lecture, and then again, from that lecture until now, what was your familiarity with the movie as sort of a whole? Had you heard of it? Did you know what it was about? Was it just kind of a name you heard tossed out? Let's start with Marquise.
So, I think the first time I ever heard about this movie was during an episode of Friends. Funnily enough, it's like one of them's like, they had just finished watching a movie, and one of them's like, it's no Citizen Kane, and Rachel's just like, I never understood the hype about that, and that was like the punchline. Yeah, but that was like the first and only time I ever heard about it outside of like film school, and then so like the first time I actually ever talked about this movie was in one of our classes with yeah, with you guys, and then that's I was not very familiar with it at all before that class, to be completely honest.
Okay, then what about you, Dayton?
So I'd already seen it like a year before we had that lecture.
Really?
So I was pretty, yeah. The first episode of I finally saw, I've seen it before, but I watched the movie and I knew nothing about it when I first saw it. I was like on an airplane and I was like, oh, they have the Citizen Kane. I guess I'll finally see it now because I knew nothing of it.
Do you remember like where you first sort of heard, like where you first sort of obtained the knowledge that this was just like one of those like classic all-time movies, or is that like such an early memory that you're not sure?
It was really a really early memory, but I guess like there was like the first episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I believe they mentioned it, and that was what
Really?
more stuck with me. So I guess sitcoms just really are obsessed with that movie.
All right, and then Andromeda, what about you?
For me personally, I have actually seen it prior to that class specifically. It was my sophomore year in high school where my teacher was just talking about how important the movie was, and I don't think we'll go super far into the history of it, just because it's, very extensive and we don't have a lot of time to go into it in depth. But we were in a point of history where we're talking about the Red Scare, and this movie is really integral in that time period. So with that kind of context, we just watched the movie, and I remember being bored. I fell asleep during it, and he was raving about how
the movie's very boring. It's okay.
Yeah, but he was talking about how this is the greatest movie of all time, and I was like, well, if it's so great, why am I so bored during this? And then after we had the class, I kind of learned, and we've all discussed this a lot, where the history of the movie is more interesting than the movie itself. So as we kind of go into the episode, I think we'll talk more about the history of how it was made and why it's so pivotal to movies now.
I want to say I can pinpoint the time in my life when I first sort of had a inkling about what the heck is Citizen Kane. Because I remember growing up, I used to watch a lot of Animaniacs, and I think it was co-produced by Steven Spielberg, and so there was a lot of topical Hollywood humor in it. The show was very sort of meta about the fact that the main characters exist and live on the Warner Brothers film line. So there's a lot of like jokes about movie making, about Hollywood, and I think like almost every episode they would like the intro lyrics are like we're so zany, and then they would try and find something that rhymed with that. And so there's one intro variation where it's just in black and white, and it's the three main characters, and they're spoiling the ending of the movie, for lack of a better word, by holding up a particular prop, and they sing Citizen Kane. And I was like, as a child, I was like, what was that? Because I don't think, I was like, I didn't know what any of that meant. And to me, I think that was something that, I think that was a really like early experience that has, strangely enough, stuck with me, because I think as a kid, I was very perceptive of like I think I should know what that is.
Yeah. So
that to me, I remember is like sort of the earliest instance of it. I think there was also a joke about it in like early Simpsons. There's probably a lot of jokes about it.
Yeah,
in
that
early Simpsons.
reminds me. Yeah, that reminds me of one of like the Family Guy bits. That was like probably the second time I ever. Well, I guess I didn't even know it was a Citizen Kane reference, but it's just like Peter's talking about like boring movies or something, or like taking too long with like a bit or something, and then it cuts to like him in like the fire room where we see the sled, and he's like, Rosebud was the sled. It was the sled. Spoiler warning if you haven't already seen the movie. But yeah, I think, and
yeah, spoilers for
the one that Austin was clearly trying to hide.
spoilers for our audience.
Spoilers for this 80-year-old movie,
80?
right? But like, I
Blame
didn't.
Peter Griffin and not Marquise.
Help!
Anyways, you were saying,
It
Marquise.
came out. It came out 1941. That's over 80 years.
Citizen Kane is a modern American story about a man called Kane, Charles Foster Kane. I don't know how to tell you about him. There's so many things to say.
So, Andromeda had brought up earlier in our discussion how the history of the making of the movie is really fascinating. And we obviously don't have time to get into the full breadth of that because that is a story unto itself. But there is a lot of like sort of fascinating things, and I'd like to touch on some of it because Orson Welles is a very curious individual, and again, not to get ahead of myself, but it's interesting how sort of reflective he is of the character that he was writing and directing and playing. Like, I think Wells is almost kind of prophetic about himself in a way. The movie comes out in 1941, and he's based it on this sort of tycoon, in part, of the American Empire, Mr. Hearst. And Hearst is offended. He is upset by some of the aspects of how the movie is portraying him, and so he tries to basically get the movie barred so it doesn't open in a lot of theaters. He tries to brand Wells a communist, even though the movie is pretty well critically received at the time. From what I remember, it certainly doesn't make its money back. It doesn't get a lot of screens. Not a lot of people see it, and it's one of those.
It definitely flopped in the ball.
I'm pretty sure I heard correctly that you said that the movie was critically acclaimed when it came out, but it still wasn't well received,
It was not.
and it was not critically successful
Oh, really?
at all. And
Yeah.
I'll have you start, Marquise.
Oh no, I was gonna say like it released in 1941, and it flopped. Like no one because William Hearst had ran his name through the mud because he owned a bunch of newspaper outpost or production. He owned major newspapers across the country. It's similar to Kane, and he ran its name through the mud, and so no one went to see it. Like they were supposed to perform at the Radio City and like the Radio City Theater in Los Angeles.
Wow.
And because of Hearst, like that got canceled for them, so that that's where their premiere was supposed to be, but that didn't end up happening. And so it flopped in 1941, and then the studio re-released it in the 1950s, and that's when it picked up traction.
I will rate it in from an audience perspective, because there's a couple big things that made this movie what it is, and I'll preface it by saying that Citizen Kane was not the first movie to create new film techniques, but this movie was the first one to do it right. So one of the techniques I want to touch on is non-linear storytelling. When you watch this movie, you're kind of thrown around a little bit. You're in about 3 different perspectives, I think, from different reporters of the movie, and that was just unheard of for movies at this time. You were so used to seeing movies told from point A to point B. So when audiences saw Citizen Kane, they just couldn't really wrap their head around like, oh, I'm bouncing from different perspectives. Like, this is actually a story that's non-linear. And to my understanding, that was one of the reasons why this movie flopped.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say it was because it's different. It was just that audiences were used to like this happened and this happened and this happened. Like they were used to getting like not force fed, but like fed information in a certain way, so that when it was told like out of order in this crazy weird way, it was just hard to understand. It was hard for them to follow through because that's just not something they were used to. But I will say that the movie definitely popularized that sort of non-linear style, and I think we have that to appreciate for future movies with um sort of non-linear storytelling. I think one of my favorite things that this movie does is like the transitions and like
Yep.
the usage of like signs in this movie is like a lot of the scenes start out with like a pan of like the top of the building, and it like shows the sign like
Like
the
a nightclub.
Inquirer.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like that, and like I was gonna say like the Inquirer building, and then like his mom's like house with that little shack. It tells you exactly where you are. It tells you everything that you need to know in that moment, like exactly where you are, what at what point in this in Kane's life is this? You know what I mean? Because it the little like wood wood board pink sign on his mom's like little shack tells you like, hey, these are not like Kane was not rich yet. This is a time in his life when he was poor, and it tells you exactly where he is. He's at his mom's shack, and so I think it's really cool how they use that to kind of just add a little bit more to his story without having to tell you. Like it's a very good use of that visual medium. But I think my favorite shot of this is where we're on his second wife's face, and we do like this wonder through through her like building sign,
Yeah.
and like, it tells you it tells you where we are. It tells you a lot about his wife that like we had not known at this point, that she's like a singer, she does shows here, right? And then it like pans, or not pans, but it like pushes through the sign, which is something like it goes through the sign, which is like a technique that like hadn't really been done before, and it's almost even today it's like still a marvel of how they did it.
I think
right?
they had to. I
And
think
it
they had
pushes-
to engineer a sign that could split apart. I could be wrong about that, but I think
Yeah.
the way they did it is they had to engineer a sign that could split apart as the camera was coming through.
Yes, and that's what they did for a lot of their like push-in scenes. They also did that like that shot where he's like in the window frame, and the mom starts walking back. The mom and Thatcher are sitting at the table. The camera had to go through that table, so what they did is they split the table in half, and after the camera came back, they pushed it right back together.
Wow.
But anyways, yeah. But I think my favorite shot is when they go through the sign, and then they push into the window, and then they like like if I wasn't like a film person, I wouldn't have caught it. But like they kind of use like a subtle fade to make it look like they're going through the window, but not they're just cutting to like a different scene essentially.
I like that we're talking about the good parts of the movie, because that's a lot of this is actually what I really wanted to touch on. And we talk a lot about the lecture that we've had, so I'm gonna give everyone a really condensed, bite-sized version of what the lecture is. So I apologize to all of the listeners in advance, but I have to give the chat visual aids for this so we can look at it together. So I'm gonna drop this in the Discord, everybody, and we're gonna look at the shot where they're all in the cabin, and to all of the listeners, what we're looking at is a photo of young Kane in the background, and we have Thatcher in the middle, and then we have Kane's parents in the foreground. And when you're looking at this, it really isn't that much. You're like, okay, it's, just any other frame in the movie. The reason that this is important is the depth of field, otherwise the focus. And I'm going to condense this down really quick because we're running out of time, but simply put, a greater depth of field allows more things to be in focus. And I have a couple examples of Deadpool because I wanted to pull from a modern movie that has techniques that this film not really started but got right? So we can see that Deadpool in this photo is the only thing in focus. And the reason that's important is because we don't need to know what's in the background. And for the second picture of Deadpool, we have the city, the car, like almost everything's in focus. And the reason that's important is because we're looking at the mayhem that Deadpool is causing, so we need to be able to see everything. So when we apply this to this frame in Citizen Kane, we need everything to be in focus because everything is important. What they're talking about in this scene involves Kane's future. What's happening is Thatcher is getting guardianship of Kane. So again, this isn't anything new, but this is really important storytelling because it's subconscious, and instead of making this 3 scenes, they're making it into one that we can see visually.
I like to piggyback off that really quickly. Orson Welles really pushed for there to be like the focus to be really deep, because in like modern day in movies we use focus to let us know like where we should focus on the screen, right? So if like whatever character's in focus, we're looking at that character and we're not really paying attention to who's out of focus, right? But Orson Welles wanted a deep focus because he had a background in theater, like he did stage plays before he came over to the radio shows and film, right? And so instead of using focus to tell you where to look at the screen, he used blocking. If you pay attention to every scene, the character that we need to focus on is always way more animated than the other characters on screen. So instead of using focus, he used blocking and movement to tell you where to look, which I think is very interesting and very much lends itself to his theater background.
And then I'm gonna piggyback off you again, Marquise, because that's another picture I have in the chat. So when we look at this frame, we have 4 men, and we have 2 men on the side, 2 in the middle, and the 2 men on the side are higher up in the frame, and then I forgot who this is. I think it's Reporter.
So this is a scene from when Kane's guardian Thatcher is sort of introducing himself to the newspaper that Kane has just purchased. So Kane is sitting at his desk, and to the left of Kane on the frame is Leland, his best friend, and his assistant, I guess, or manager, Mr. Bernstein. And then on the right of frame, we see the back of his guardian, Mr. Thatcher's head. And everybody, their heads are sort of angled down to look at Wells as he's sitting at his desk, sort of in the center of frame. And so our eyes, sort of just almost by the way their noses are pointing, our eyes are sort of naturally drawn to him without us having to, have everything else in the scene be blurry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other things that are going into this as well. So the 2 men on the far left and far right side of the frame are wearing dark suits. And then the 2 men in the middle are wearing lighter colored, shirts. So it's even more going to draw your focus towards the middle of what's important in the scene. So on top of the framing, it is also the lighting, and it is also the wardrobe. So you have so many things that are going into this one frame that are making it subconscious. It is really good storytelling to just look at it, know what you have to see, and know what is important to pay attention to.
Yeah, I also want to talk about this picture, or to continue to talk about this picture, because what I found really interesting about the camera technique is that a lot of the time they would cut holes into the floor so they could put the camera, so they could use really imposing angles and make whoever's on camera look very in charge and
larger than life.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and I know they're not necessarily using it in this scene, but I still like how the framing, it just makes Orson Welles' Kane look so powerful in this scene, which I think it's funny because he's sitting down. Yeah, he still looks like the most powerful person in this room. And then I'd like to talk about the background. If you watch the movie, I didn't realize this at first, but if you watch the movie, the people in the back do not move at all, and that's because a lot of the backgrounds in this movie are just painted or like paintings essentially.
Yeah, matte paintings.
Yeah, matte paintings. They're so that's why and that's another reason why he liked using deep focus, is because a lot of the backgrounds were just paintings, so they didn't have to worry about, you know, and I think I didn't know how to word that. I'm sorry, but I think
well, we had a
it's
with all of the matte paintings and going on, and so you're having to composite, you're having to stitch what you filmed together with those matte paintings. I think we had a film instructor who said that this is a movie that for its time was just as complex in a special effects sense as Star Wars, and I think that sort of puts it into perspective historically. So I do want to shift over now to another topic. I want to shift over now to talking to more subjectively, not necessarily what do we know about the movie, but how do we feel about the movie. And I'm starting to get some hints from the peanut gallery about how you guys feel. But I'll hold my tongue. So I want to throw it over to Dayton, actually. Dayton, how do you feel about Citizen Kane?
At the beginning, at the news segment, I thought the narrator was really boring. But as soon as Kane, I was really bored. The dude was talking so slow, and it was just like, this information could have been cut down way more, and it would have gotten
Nose on the move.
But I really like the movie. I actually like the movie, unlike most people that we went to film school with. Or like,
you sound like you're throwing some shade there.
No, it's not any shit. It's just saying the truth. You guys cannot like the movie. That's fine. I liked the movie. I like it. I think it's a 8 out of 10. I enjoyed I thought that the main character was interesting, and the titular Kane. I thought the news guy was an but he was kind of supposed to be. The news guy, the main reporter guy. He was
the main reporter. What?
Yeah, he goes up to the lady, like his ex-wife is crying because he's dead, and he's mad because she won't give him a new. Oh,
whoa!
And he's mad because he won't. He's mad because she won't give him a news story. She's literally crying about her dead husband or ex-husband.
He wasn't mad.
Yeah, he was. He was pushing it. He was pushing it. He was like, and then as soon as he's like calling to go somewhere else, the guy's like, "Hey, I got some information for you." He's like, "Hang on 1 second, pal." And he just keeps talking to this other guy on the phone, and it's like
exactly.
And instead of saying like, "Oh, I'll be right with you in a minute,"
because you can wrap up the phone call faster than you can wrap up that information. He's like, okay, just perfect. Just give me.
Nobody's not being nice about it. He's like, close the door. Close the door, buddy. I'll be right with you in a second.
Okay, my problem with that entire scene.
What's your problem with that scene, Marquise?
My problem with that scene in particular, right, is that phone call was purely for exposition purposes. That is the only thing it did, right? And maybe that was new for the time. No, listen. Okay, you know what? Cut that part out, because if we're gonna
No.
Marquise, continue with your thoughts.
No. What was it? So, the expositioning was expositioning, and that angered you deeply.
And you know what? Maybe that, and my thoughts are maybe that was like something new for the time, like exposition given like that. And I think it was a really creative way to give exposition, probably for the time. I'm not sure, but it annoyed me because it ruined the flow of that scene, and for the reason that Dayton gives. It's like the waiter tries to give him the information he's trying to get, and he's like, I'm on the phone.
Wouldn't it have been better if he just was walking away and the guy was like, stopped him real quick, gave him the information, and then get the thing and then leave?
Yes, but it uses the phone as an excuse to give exposition for future reference within that scene.
Okay, well.
So, what are your thoughts on the movie?
So I don't mean to be presumptuous, Marquise, but I feel like I'm starting to sense you may not have the highest opinion of this movie.
Listen,
I'm
I
listening.
need to be forward. I need to be forward with you guys.
Oh no.
I pulled in Andromeda, okay?
Oh no.
I watched this movie like halfway, and I thought to myself, I could have got more out of a video essay.
Oh.
And so that's what I did.
My.
Wait a minute, that's not pulling an Andromeda. Pulling an Andromeda would not be watching the movie at all before recording. But
Our audience
for this,
doesn't know what pulling an Andromeda is.
I don't even know what that is.
That's a you, Marquise. You coined that term.
Are we not? Are we? Does the first episode that we did not?
This is the first episode.
Okay, so the episode 0 is that just wiped completely from memory then?
Wait, why is Marquise blaming women? First of all,
Nobody blamed
And we're
the woman.
recording this during Pride
You
Month,
did.
too. That's so messed up.
What does that have to do with? Okay, anyways.
because I've seen this movie 3 times before recording this episode,
Okay.
so I have no
what?
idea what you're talking about.
This is insane. The gaslighting is crazy.
Yes,
So wait, hold on. But when did you stop? When did you stop watching?
I stopped watching after Shawty had a toothache and called him inside, and then like they were in her.
That's like a third of the movie.
That's directly it was at like the hour and 5-minute mark. The movie is 1 hour and 59 minutes long.
Okay.
Anyways, it was after the part where they were in her room and he shut the door for almost no reason other than to be pervy, I suspect. And then she's like, "Oh, my nana requires me to have my door open when there are gentlemen over." And then I was just like, "Okay."
Is that what she sounded like?
Marquise was like, "Oh, there's not gonna be sex in this movie. I'm close."
When he threw in the towel.
She had a more mid-Atlantic accent.
Oh, okay.
So I couldn't. Yeah, I don't know how to do that. But
Wait, you're saying you stopped watching because you hated a woman?
no,
Oh
I stopped
my
watching because
goodness.
this movie doesn't pass the Bechdel test, and I just couldn't stand it.
I don't think its premise is conducive to the Bechdel test. I think its
No, it's
premise is inherently... The premise is literally talking about a man. Of course it's not going to pass the Bechdel test.
I know, but listen,
I'm listening.
I at this point when I stopped the movie, at this point I thought to myself, well, hey, I already know who Rosebud is, and that's not what the movie's about. The movie is a deep dive into Kane's life to show how greed and wealth can essentially ruin your life.
I
Right.
would argue that Rosebud is kind of the whole point of the movie. That's like why the reporters are
Yes, that's
like
the
that's what?
no. When I say Rosebud is not the point of the movie, I'm saying like that is the narrative device that we use to tell Kane's life. But that's not what the movie's about. The movie is not about, oh, what's Rosebud. That's not what the movie's about. That's not the message. The message is that, hey, if you were like Kane even says it himself within the first hour of the movie. Like it explains the message. If I were not rich, I'd be a better man. And I feel like that's what the movie's about.
It also says at the very end that it's meant to be more of a piece than a part of the whole. The whole answer.
Yeah.
It's a deep dive, and you got out in the shallow end.
Yes, because I understood the point already, and I didn't, and I feel like as a general audience, right, that what's reeling you into this movie is finding out who Rosebud is, but I already knew who Rosebud was, so I was just like, I get it, I get the point, and I was like, I personally feel that the making of this movie is way more interesting than the actual movie itself.
So, what are your thoughts on the second half? You said your thoughts on the first half. Being, like,
Yeah,
just-
what do you think about the half of the movie you haven't seen? What were your thoughts on the half of the movie
think-
that you've never
I
seen?
Did you not see it?
No, I said I stopped watching it and I watched a video essay.
You. That's what
my
you did.
goodness.
Yes.
Oh my
What
god.
the
I had
Okay, I'm just.
I know what happens, man.
One
Rosebud is
person who hasn't
enslaved.
seen the movie that was supposed to finally see it.
I cannot believe this.
What? And I
Everybody calm down. Okay. Can I just say, So just to be clear, not opaque, but clear, right? You got on a show called I Finally Saw. And you did not.
And I did. I saw it.
Finally
No,
saw
I saw it. I
Citizen
did not
Kane.
like the movie. I finally saw Citizen Kane, and
You
I fell
finally
asleep
saw
because I was
half of
bored.
Citizen Kane. You saw City. You saw Cities. Anyways, Andromeda. Please get us out of here. What did you think of the movie?
As I mentioned,
As you mentioned.
I've seen this movie 3 times.
Count it.
My issue with it is that I forget about it almost every time because to me it's just not memorable. And that being said, I still think it's an integral part of cinema to watch. Like, it genuinely does kickstart a lot of really interesting things. Like, as I mentioned, non-linear storytelling, and we can talk more about composition and framing, but the way Orson Welles handles all of these shots in his film is really important to modern day cinema. And then on top of that, the camera work he used is unlike anything else you're going to see around that time. Aside from Hitchcock, which I do think he was inspired by this film and then created other works because of it. Because there are certain things you watch, specifically with the camera work, and you're wondering, like, how is this happening? How is it that this movie is able to do that? And when you look at this time frame, like, they just don't have the same technology to make that kind of stuff work, so they have to cheat it. And I don't have a lot of notes regarding that, but going back to how I feel about the movie, I think it's an important movie to watch, but it is boring. You're probably not going to like watching it, if I'm going to be completely real with you.
And I agree. I think
Boy, we're gonna make all the cinephiles so happy with this first, or maybe. I mean, I'm being sarcastic, but actually, they maybe will. Maybe all those cinephiles are gonna be like, someone finally said it.
Exactly. I think we're saying what everyone is afraid to say, and that it's a boring
Oh,
movie,
no.
and that
Oh,
you
no.
will fall asleep during it.
no,
No,
listen,
because the
listen,
bird will
I
wake you up,
appreciate-
guys. The bird will wake you up. The bird jump scare.
It made me like scared. It actually did scare me because I forgot it happened.
That means it worked. That's the magic of cinema in action, Dayton.
I wanted to say something. I
So
think
say
if
it.
Susan, what? Okay,
That sounded so threatening. I'm
I
sorry.
think the thing, some of the lines that Kane says, that's like an edit, like a Sigma edit at some point.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
like he says, like I plan on losing $1 million. I lost $1 million last year. I plan on losing $1 million this year. Plan on losing $1 million next year.
Oh,
That means I'm gonna run out. I'm gonna be
at the rate
out
of losing $1 million a year, I'll have to sell the paper off in 60 years.
And then it's
Yeah.
Sigma song.
The Sigma song. Can you sing
I
a
don't know.
Sigma
What
song
do they
for
have?
us?
What do they have?
Don't sing the Sigma song for us.
No, I think my favorite quote from him is that, like, I'd be a better man if I weren't rich. And I feel like that is kind of what the movie, again, is like what the movie's about, and it's so simple and it's wrapped up into that line. It's like Rosebud. The last thing he had in his mind before he died was his attachment to a simple life. And so I feel like that one quote just sums up the entire movie so well. No, I think my favorite scene in this movie is the montage. He has talking to his first wife, and it's like, it just kind of shows their love dying over like
Oh,
it's
yeah.
15 years.
The table gets
And,
bigger.
and like, yeah, and in just a couple minutes, and I think the table getting bigger is such like a great visual thing. And I think it's like a really good use of a montage in a movie.
What about you, Andromeda? Is there one scene that sticks out in your mind as like, I think I
No.
enjoyed that? No,
Cool.
nothing.
I like immediately
fair
forget the
enough.
movie after I watch it.
I guess the wheel lands on me now. Um, I have to say that I think there is some part of me, especially having seen it twice now, that has kind of fallen in love with this movie. To me, Citizen Kane is very much about this whole idea of like, can you know a person? Could you ever like truly know the full breadth of who somebody was, especially through only the memories and recollections of the people that knew them? And so I remember I was trying to write some short story or other, and somebody looked at what I was working on, and they were like, "Oh, that's Citizen Kane." And so I love that premise. I love that idea of just like we're all sort of susceptible to our own. Our memories are not exact. They are not perfect. And so we all have our own distinct versions and ideas of who everyone in our life is that is different from, like people talk about like when you know somebody for only a very specific period of time, you might know a completely different person than someone who knew them at a different point in their life. And so that, as a premise, I think is amazing. I love that premise. I think Wells does such a good job of portraying Kane. I think he really does such a good job of embodying Kane that when I first watched the movie, I thought that the Kane that we first see as 25 years old, when I think his name is Mr. Thatcher, after the montage with him in the newspapers, is like this little montage where he's reading all the newspapers that Orson's made, or that Kane's made, and we go to the office. I thought that was a different actor. I thought there was 3 actors that played Kane. I thought there was little kid Kane, I thought there was young adult Kane, and then there was old man Kane. And obviously now I see sort of past the makeup, but that's again sort of testament to the makeup at the time. I thought that was 2 guys. And yeah, he embodies this like tycoon American. And I think I find that really fascinating, and I find that really like encapturing of just like can we really sort of pick apart this person that you never knew and actually understand them? Like, we can only understand people so far when they're alive, when they're in our lives.
I wanted to go on the makeup. I thought
yes.
that the makeup was really good, except for the really old Kane right before his death. I don't think that makeup was as good as the rest. Because there was one shot at the beginning where he does like an interview about he does an interview. I remember one of the questions was like, how's business? What is business in like
how did you find the business in Europe?
Yeah, that one. I thought that makeup was really good, and I was disappointed that they didn't use that for like right before he died, because I think that more looked like an old man, not like a young guy with old person makeup.
There's a lot of little moments in this movie, but one that has always sort of stood out to me. There's this running through line throughout the film about sort of like, and I think part of the thesis of the movie is this idea that I see actually being really relevant today, which is this whole like mourning a life you never lived. Being remorseful and missing this thing that you never even experienced, and that you maybe could have done, but you perhaps didn't take the initiative or had the option, or the time was never right. And we sort of see that obviously most literally through Kane, and how his sort of story wraps up, and that sort of touching on like his desire in the end to have wanted like a simple life. But the one that sticks out to me, so there's the character Mr. Bernstein. I believe he's played by Everett Sloane, and there's a moment when he's being interviewed by the reporter in his office, and he is talking about remembering things. And there's this little monologue that he gives about being, I believe it's on the Staten Island ferry, and he sees the other ferry across the way, and there's a woman in the white dress and the parasol. And I adore that monologue. I think it's really brilliantly delivered by Sloane, and I think it's a moment that sets up that theme and that idea that is then sort of expounded upon in the end by Kane, that like there are these little things that we can remember, these inklings of an alternate life that can like reverberate in our minds all throughout our lives, and it'll be the most random innocuous thing, but you're just like, man, I wonder like how unrecognizable I would be if I had talked to her, or if I had stayed home in Colorado, you know. And so that, to me, it's those sort of things that make this movie something that I could actually see myself revisiting. I think I've always sort of explained Citizen Kane to people that it's like the Beatles. I've seen this growing sentiment, especially in younger folk, kind of like sort of struggling to sort of wrap their heads around how famous the Beatles were, how beloved the Beatles were when they were out and about. And I think I've heard some people be like, well, I've tried to listen to the Beatles and they just sound like any other band from like the 60s. And or like just it just sounds like normal music. And to me, I'm like, that's the point. And I'm not a huge like Beatles fan, but it's just like, and they didn't invent every technique. They didn't necessarily invent every aspect of their sound, at least to my knowledge. But they picked and pulled, and they combined a lot of things, and they were able to do that on like a large stage, and it proliferated a lot. And so it's like, now a lot of music sounds like the Beatles because they did that stuff and they got famous doing it, and so everybody was kind of looking to them. And that's sort of how I feel about Citizen Kane, where it's just like, some people might watch it and say the cinematography's pretty, but it's not like unique. And it's like, yeah, because every movie, or at least especially in America, especially kind of here in the West, so many movies have emulated what it's done visually, narratively. And I think that is why I that's sort of how I explain it to people, where it's just like, the reason it may not necessarily stand out is because that is how sort of I feel we are deep into emulating it, even all these like decades later.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what you'll think about Mr. Kane. I can't imagine. You see, I play the part myself. Well, Kane is a hero and a scoundrel, a no-account and a swell guy, a great lover, a great American citizen, and a dirty dog. It depends on who's talking about him.
I'm going to bring us home now. So I have one more question I sort of want to pass around, and that's, would you recommend this movie to somebody? And so I want to start with Andromeda. Would you recommend Citizen Kane?
I would, but once again, I would give him a fair warning that it's not an interesting movie to watch, and that you're likely going to have to do some more research on it, but just to see it, and like going in with the intention of learning, I think is the important part, because you are going to get a lot out of the film from a lot of, I don't even know how to explain it, like you're just going to be more cognizant that modern movies derive from this.
Dayton, what about you? Would you recommend this movie to someone? Is there a specific archetype in mind? Why or why not?
Majority of people know. Majority of people I would not recommend this movie. Just because I don't want them to come back to... Because most times they just come back saying, like, that was boring. I guess if they were, like, very interested in, like, in how movies are made, I'd recommend it. But really, I would rarely recommend this. If you are already interested in the movie, you're already probably going to see it without my recommendation.
And then Marquise.
Oh,
Marquise, would you recommend Citizen Kane to people?
generally, no. I would. No, I feel like I would only recommend this movie to you if you want to make movies. I feel like outside of that, you're not going to have an appreciation for how this movie was made. So I would encourage people to watch it if you want, if and not just watch the movie, but pay attention to it, study it, see what they're doing, all the visual techniques. Think about how they're doing what they're doing. In a general audience, I wouldn't recommend it to you because it's you would not enjoy it. It is a movie you need to study, not a movie you need to watch. If that makes sense.
Apparently, you don't need to study the second half of it, according to Marquise.
Listen. I got what I needed.
Okay. Well, I think
Is this how you watch all movies, Marquise?
he gets to the halfway point
You
and
just
he
watch
just
the
gets.
first half and you're like, oh, I'm good.
He did it. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
you
he does
know,
it in the theater. He does it in the theater once, where he was watching the Minecraft
Yeah.
movie, and he got halfway through, and he was like, "Nope," and then he dumped his popcorn on this old lady in front of us.
No, the thing is,
Yeah, he
he
called.
sat through all of Quantumania, but he couldn't get through Citizen Kane.
No, you know
That is
what?
true.
They
That
call-
is true. He's seen the entirety of Ant-Man: Quantumania, but he couldn't sit through Citizen Kane.
Quantumania had big explosions. Okay.
Okay.
You didn't have to watch a video essay about it.
It's because he spent $20 on it and couldn't leave.
They call me Mr. Haffer, and you know what? I did watch a video essay on Quantumania. So boom.
You really got me, Mark.
Would you recommend Citizen Kane, Austin? Well, Austin, that's a really interesting question. So, would I recommend Citizen Kane? I think I know Marquise said that like maybe only to prospective filmmakers, but I think I want to open it up a little bit more. I think if you care about movies and you are a curious person and you care about them as an art form, as a medium, and also just for fun entertainment, like if you're just like, I'm curious about the history of movies, I think watch it. I will say I enjoyed this movie a lot more the second time. The first time I was definitely lost and the like, and I think I was definitely like a little aimless at times. But I think definitely if you care about them as a medium, especially as Marquis said, like if you want to make movies, I think this is due diligence. I think this is and then read about it, listen to an audio commentary, watch a video essay, or even just break down the shots for yourself and sort of think about like, man, how might they have done this? Because I think there really is there was a quote, I think, from the making of the movie, and when Orson was contracted to make a movie for the studio, I don't remember the name of the cinematographer for the movie, but he was a very famous cinematographer, and you'll have to forgive me, I don't remember his name. And he came to Orson and he said, I want to shoot your movie. I want to shoot your movie because you've never made a movie before, and so you're not an old codger that thinks he knows what's impossible. You don't know what's impossible. And I believe he said something to Orson where he said, everything about how to use a camera can be learned in a day. And yeah, you know, this movie is about sort of pushing forward, and I think that sort of spirit, if you care about movies, and like I said, especially if you care about making movies, I think this is something you should definitely tap into.
What's the real truth about Charles Foster Kane? I wish you'd come to this theater when Citizen Kane plays here and decide for yourself.
Okay, well, I think that's going to bring us to an end to this episode of I Finally Saw. Thank you, I love you all, and good night. Okay.
Okay, Marquis.